Welcome to Shadow Fable, where stories linger long after the last word is spoken. If you enjoy the eerie tales that whisper just beyond the edge of sleep, be sure to subscribe. Tonight, we journey into a tale of quiet dread, the subtle unraveling of a mind caught in the space between the real and the imagined. It started with a noise, soft, insistent, and just at the edge of perception. At first, Peter dismissed it. Old houses had old sounds, wood expanding in the night, pipes settling, the distant hum of the city. He had bought the house precisely because it was old, because it stood apart from the sterile uniformity of modern apartments. It had character, stories soaked into its very walls. But this sound wasn't like the others. It came only at night, always at the same hour, 2:13 a.m., a faint rhythmic tapping, deliberate and patient, as if waiting for him to notice. And he did. The first night he was too groggy to care. The second he was aware but unwilling to acknowledge it. By the third, the rhythm was burned into his thoughts. 3 taps, a pause, 3 more. He lay there in the dark, eyes wide, listening. The sound came from the far corner of the room, where the old oak wardrobe stood. Its antique handles gleamed faintly in the dim glow of the streetlight seeping through the curtains. Peter swallowed. He knew it was nothing. A branch tapping against the house, perhaps. A settling floorboard, something mundane. But his body refused to believe what his mind assured him was true. He turned on the lamp. The noise stopped immediately. The silence that followed was absolute, pressing in on him like something living. He exhaled slowly, shaking his head at himself. Still, he left the light on for the rest of the night. The next evening, he told himself he wouldn't listen for it. But 2:13 came, and like an actor stepping onto a stage at the precise moment of cue, the sound began. Tap dash, tap dash, tap dash, pause, tap dash, tap dash, tap dash. Peter sat up. He wasn't dreaming. He wasn't imagining it. He threw off the covers and walked toward the wardrobe. His bare feet made no sound against the old wooden floor. He hesitated only a moment before yanking open the doors. Nothing. The emptiness inside was almost disappointing. His work shirts, his winter coats, a pair of shoes. Nothing unusual, no gaps in the wood, no holes leading outside. Just a wardrobe. He exhaled, shaking his head at himself. You're overtired. Stressed, that's all. But as he closed the doors and stepped back, the sensation hit him. A creeping awareness, a feeling that something had just moved behind him. He spun around. The room was still, silent. He was alone. And yet, for the rest of the night, he could not bring himself to turn his back on the wardrobe again. The days passed, but the nights remained the same. Every night, 2:13 a.m., the tapping, the pause, the waiting. Peter stopped sleeping properly. He told himself it didn't matter, that the sound wasn't real, but something in him disagreed. His reflection in the mirror showed a man hollowed out by exhaustion. It wasn't just the sound anymore. It was the shadows, stretching longer than they should. The way the wardrobe doors never seemed to sit quite right. Always the faintest crack between them, no matter how carefully he closed them. The way he sometimes caught, in the edge of his vision, something moving where nothing should be moving. By the 5th night, he no longer turned the light off at all. And by the 7th, he realized something. The tapping wasn't random. It wasn't just happening. It was waiting for him to answer. That night, when the first tap came, Peter sat up in bed. His heart pounded against his ribs, but he didn't turn on the light. Not yet. Tap dash, tap dash, tap dash. He exhaled shakily. Then, against every instinct screaming at him not to, he lifted his hand and tapped back. The silence that followed was deeper than any he had ever known. It stretched, vast and thick, a held breath in the fabric of the night. He could hear his own pulse, hear the blood rushing through his ears, hear the absence of everything else. Then, tap dash, tap dash, tap dash. The sound didn't come from the wardrobe. It came from just beside his bed. He turned on the light so fast he nearly broke the lamp. The room was empty. Still. His breath came in short gasps. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. And yet, from that night on, the tapping came closer. It no longer started at the wardrobe. It started at the wall. Then at the floorboards, then at the foot of his bed. By the 10th night, Peter knew with absolute certainty that if he let it get any closer, he would not wake up the next morning. So, on the 11th night, Peter made a decision. He wouldn't stay. He had told himself this house was just a house, that the sounds were tricks of an overworked mind. But the feeling in his gut, the cold certainty that something unseen was creeping closer, was stronger than logic. At 11 p.m. he packed a bag, just the essentials. His laptop, a few changes of clothes, his wallet. He told himself he would book a hotel, find another apartment, sell the house if necessary. He would leave and never think about it again. But as he zipped the bag closed, a terrible thought struck him. What if it follows? The idea was absurd, irrational, but so was everything else. What if the tapping had never been about the house? What if it had been waiting for him to acknowledge it? And now that he had... Peter shivered. He slung the bag over his shoulder and headed for the door. Then, tap dash, tap dash, tap dash, not from the wardrobe, not from the wall. From the door he was about to open. Peter stopped breathing. His fingers, just inches from the doorknob, curled into a fist. The silence stretched. A test, a warning, a game. He took a step back. The air in the room felt thick, pressing against him like unseen hands. His mind raced, searching for an answer. If he ran, would it chase him? If he stayed, would it creep closer still? Peter wasn't sure what was worse, not knowing what it was, or knowing that it had been waiting for him to try to leave. He turned, heart hammering. He couldn't leave, not like this. He had to break whatever this was. His gaze fell on the wardrobe, the place where it had started. There were two choices: run and hope it didn't follow, or open the wardrobe. Neither option was safe, but something told him that the only way out, the real way out, was forward. Peter swallowed hard, his throat dry as paper. Slowly, he stepped toward the wardrobe. The tapping didn't return. The air was heavy with expectation. He reached out, wrapped his fingers around the handles. They were ice cold. He yanked the doors open. Nothing. His clothes hung limp and undisturbed. The shoes were neatly lined at the bottom. The back panel was solid. Except... Peter blinked. The wardrobe was too deep. He stepped closer, frowning. The shadows at the back weren't just dark, they were deep. A void, like the space extended beyond what should have been possible. His fingers brushed the back panel. It felt solid, but his eyes told him otherwise. He swallowed, raised a hand, and knocked. Tap dash, tap dash, tap dash, silence, then tap dash, tap dash, tap dash. But this time, it wasn't an answer. It was an invitation. A whisper of air brushed past his face like something moving within the dark. Then, slowly, impossibly, the back of the wardrobe began to open. The back of the wardrobe didn't swing open like a door. It peeled away, like paper curling in fire, edges dissolving into nothing. Beyond it, nothing but black. Not darkness, not shadow. Absence. Peter staggered back, but the moment he moved, something changed. The air around him turned heavy, thick like water, pressing against his skin. The silence had weight, a presence that filled every inch of the room. And from within that blackness, something stepped forward. He didn't see it, not in the way one sees a person or an object. It wasn't there, and then it was, like his mind had only just been allowed to register it. A shape, tall, hollow, waiting. No eyes, no features, but somehow, Peter knew it was watching. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't listen. The thing took another step. No sound, no shift in the air, just closer. The edges of the wardrobe were gone now, fading into the black. And Peter realized with a sick, sinking certainty, it wasn't that something had come out. It was that the wardrobe was no longer in his room. His room was inside the wardrobe. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, gone. Everything outside his immediate reach had been consumed, swallowed by the same nothingness that had waited beyond the wood. And he was sinking. His feet, his legs, no longer standing on anything but simply within it, as though the world had unraveled beneath him. Panic took hold. Peter lunged backward, grasping wildly for something, anything. His hands found the door frame, not the wardrobe's. His bedroom door, it was still there, a sliver of reality, just inches from being devoured. A choice. Step forward into the unknown, or pull back if it would let him. Peter hesitated, and for the first time, the thing in the dark moved with intent. It reached, not with hands, not with anything he could see, but he felt it. Long fingers curling around the edges of his mind, something unseen pressing against his thoughts like a whisper just before waking. His grip tightened on the doorframe. Number. With every ounce of strength he had left, he wrenched himself back, and the world snapped into place. The wardrobe was just a wardrobe. The shadows at the back, solid wood, the tapping gone. Peter hit the floor, gasping, his skin cold, his heartbeat wild in his chest. For a long time he didn't move. When he finally did, it was slow, unsteady. He turned his head just enough to see the wardrobe stood open, empty, harmless, but he knew better. Because as he lay there, something else settled inside him. A feeling, quiet and absolute. The tapping had stopped, but only because now it no longer needed to knock. Thank you for listening to Shadow Fable. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Until next time, keep the lights on.